The old building had secrets. Every corner, every hallway, every locked door seemed to whisper stories from decades past. But nobody paid attention to those whispers anymore. The Riverside Performing Arts Center was too busy preparing future stars, too focused on the next big competition, the next scholarship winner, the next name that would make headlines. 14-year-old David knew every inch of that building. Not because he was a student there. He wasn't one of the lucky kids who got to walk through those doors with expensive instrument cases and designer backpacks. David was there because his father pushed a mop across those shiny floors every single evening, making sure the marble gleamed and the brass fixtures sparkled for the next day's classes. While other kids his age were at home playing video games or hanging out with friends, David sat in the lobby doing homework under the flickering fluorescent lights. He'd watch the students leave, their conversations full of auditions and recitals and summer programs in Europe. They never looked at him. To them, he was just part of the furniture, as invisible as the paintings on the walls. But David didn't mind being invisible. Being invisible meant he could explore. It started on a Tuesday in September. His father had forgotten his keys in the maintenance closet on the 3rd floor, the old wing that nobody used anymore. The building had been expanded twice over the years, and this section had been left behind like an unwanted memory. The heating didn't work properly up there. The lights flickered. Most of the rooms were locked and filled with broken chairs, old music stands, and forgotten equipment. David climbed the stairs, his sneakers making soft sounds on the worn carpet. The 3rd floor always felt different, quieter, like stepping into another world. He found his father's keys easily enough, but on the way back, he heard something. Or rather, he felt something, a pull, a curiosity he couldn't explain. There was a door at the end of the hallway. Room 307. He'd walked past it 100 times before but never really noticed it. Today, for some reason, he stopped. The door wasn't locked. It creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. The room took his breath away. Dust particles floated in the light coming through the tall windows. Old velvet curtains hung heavy and faded, but in the center of the room, catching the last rays of evening sun, stood a grand piano. Not just any piano. This instrument looked like something from a palace. The wood gleamed even under a layer of dust. The legs were carved with intricate designs. Even without knowing anything about pianos, David could tell this was something special. He should have left. He knew that, but his feet carried him forward anyway, drawn to the instrument like metal to a magnet. He'd never touched a real piano before. There was a keyboard in his music class at school, but it was always surrounded by other kids, and he never felt brave enough to push his way to the front. David's fingers trembled as he reached out and pressed a single key. The note rang out clear and pure, filling the empty room with sound. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. He pressed another key, then another. Each note seemed to hang in the air, mixing with the dust and the fading light. That night, lying in bed, David couldn't stop thinking about the piano. He could still feel the smooth keys under his fingertips, still hear those notes echoing in his mind. He grabbed his phone and started searching. How to play piano. Piano tutorials for beginners. Piano basics. The videos amazed him. People's fingers flying across keys, creating melodies that made his chest feel tight. He watched one video, then another, until his phone battery died and his eyes burned from the blue light. The next evening, after his father started his cleaning route on the 1st floor, David went straight to room 307. His heart pounded as he climbed those stairs. What if someone saw him? What if he got his father in trouble? But the pull was too strong. He had to go back. This time he brought a notebook. He watched a tutorial video, paused it, tried to copy what he saw. His fingers felt clumsy and thick. The notes came out wrong, jarring and ugly, but he kept trying. 15 minutes passed, then 30. His father wouldn't come looking for him for at least an hour. It became his routine. Every evening while his father cleaned, David disappeared into room 307. He taught himself to read the basic notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. He learned where middle C was. He practiced scales until his fingers ached. The phone screen was cracked from when he dropped it last summer, and sometimes he had to tilt it just right to see the videos clearly. But he didn't care. Weeks turned into months. September became October, then November. His fingers stopped feeling clumsy. The calluses that formed on his fingertips didn't bother him. He started to understand how the keys connected, how pressing them in certain orders created something that sounded like actual music. David discovered something during those secret practice sessions. When he played, everything else disappeared. The worry about fitting in at school, the embarrassment of wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation, the loneliness of being the kid nobody noticed. None of it mattered when his fingers touched those keys. The piano didn't care that he wasn't rich. It didn't care that he wasn't enrolled in the fancy classes downstairs. It only cared about the music. He got bolder. He started attempting simple songs from the tutorial videos. Children's songs at first, then popular melodies. Some days were frustrating. His fingers wouldn't cooperate, or he couldn't figure out the timing. But other days felt like magic. Days when the notes flowed and the music sounded almost real, almost beautiful. David never told anyone about his secret. Not his father, who would worry about him touching something expensive. Not his teachers, who already thought he was too quiet. Not the few kids at school who sometimes talked to him. The piano was his alone, his secret world where he could be someone different, someone who created beauty instead of just watching other people create it. It was a Tuesday evening in early December when everything changed. David had been playing for about 40 minutes. He was working on a piece that had taken him 2 weeks to learn, and finally, he was getting it right. His fingers moved across the keys with a confidence he'd never felt before. The music filled the room, and for those few minutes, David forgot about everything else. He forgot about being careful. He forgot about being quiet. He forgot about being invisible. The door burst open with a bang that made David's hands freeze on the keys. A man stood in the doorway, his face red, his eyes wide with shock and fury. David recognized him immediately. Everyone who spent any time in the building knew Vincent Castellano, the director of the Riverside Performing Arts Center. He was legendary for his temper, famous for his impossibly high standards, and absolutely terrifying when angry. And right now he looked furious. "What do you think you're doing?" The director's voice wasn't a yell. It was something worse. It was cold and sharp, each word cutting through the air like a knife. "Get your hands off that piano. Right now." David's hands flew up like he'd been burned. His whole body went cold. "Do you have any idea what that instrument is worth? Do you have any concept of what you've been touching?" The director walked into the room, each step deliberate. "That piano was donated by Jonathan Wright himself. It's worth more than most cars. And you've been up here doing what exactly? Playing your little games?" David couldn't speak. His throat had closed up completely. "Who are you? Are you even a student here?" The director's eyes narrowed. "Wait, you're the janitor's kid, aren't you?" David managed a small nod. "Unbelievable." The director ran a hand through his gray hair. "Listen to me very carefully. You are never ever to touch this piano again. You're not to come to this floor. You're not to go anywhere except the lobby while you wait for your father. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," David whispered. "If I catch you near this piano again, your father will be looking for a new job. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir." "Now get out of my sight," David ran. He ran down the stairs, past the studios where he could hear scales and arpeggios, past the lobby out into the cold December air. He didn't stop until he reached the small park across the street, where he finally let himself breathe. His hands were still shaking, but they weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking because they already missed the keys. The next morning, David's father didn't say anything at breakfast. He just looked tired, more tired than usual. That's how David knew the director had talked to him. They ate their cereal in silence, the only sound the scraping of spoons against bowls. David wanted to apologize, to explain, to tell his father about the music and how it made him feel. But the words stuck in his throat like sand. Finally, his father spoke. "David," his voice was quiet, "you can't go touching things that don't belong to us. You understand that, right?" "I know. I'm sorry. That man, Mr. Castellano, he was real upset. Said you'd been sneaking around for months." His father rubbed his eyes. "He could have fired me right there." "You know that?" 15 years I've worked in that building. 15 years of showing up every single day, making sure everything's clean and proper." The guilt hit David like a punch to the stomach. "Dad, He gave me a warning. Said if he catches you anywhere you're not supposed to be, that's it. We both know I can't lose this job. Not with rent due and your school fees and everything else." David nodded, staring at his cereal. It had gone soggy. "You wait in the lobby from now on. Just the lobby. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." His father stood up, taking his bowl to the sink. I don't understand why you'd risk so much for a piano. It's just an instrument. But it wasn't just an instrument. David wanted to scream that. Wanted to make his father understand. But how do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? How do you tell someone that for a few hours a week you felt like you mattered? Like you were good at something? Like you were more than invisible? School that day was worse than usual. Word had spread somehow. Kids whispered and pointed. That's the janitor's kid. I heard he broke into the old wing. My mom said he almost got his dad fired. The stories got bigger with each telling. By lunch, some kids were saying he'd tried to steal the piano. Others said he'd damaged it. None of them knew the truth, but that didn't matter. David ate alone in the corner of the cafeteria, trying to make himself even smaller than usual. He pulled out his notebook, the one where he'd been writing down notes and practice routines. Without thinking, his fingers started moving on the table, silent, invisible, playing a song nobody else could hear. What are you doing? David jumped. Mrs. Patricia Chen stood next to his table, her lunch tray in hand. She was his music teacher, though he'd never actually spoken to her outside of class. She was older, probably his grandmother's age, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses that always sat crooked on her nose. Nothing, David said quickly, pulling his hands into his lap. That didn't look like nothing. She sat down across from him without asking. Those were finger movements. Practiced ones. You were playing something, weren't you? David's face burned. It's stupid. Music is never stupid. Mrs. Chen opened her lunch container. I heard about what happened at the Riverside Center. Small town. People talk. David wanted to disappear into the floor. The other teachers in the lounge, they were gossiping about it yesterday. Can you believe the janitor's son thought he could just play that expensive piano? That sort of thing. She took a bite of her sandwich. But you know what I thought? David shook his head. I thought, why was a 14-year-old boy spending his evenings teaching himself piano instead of doing literally anything else teenagers do? That takes dedication. That takes passion. She looked at him over her crooked glasses. How long were you practicing up there? 3 months, David whispered. 3 months of teaching yourself. What were you using? Books, YouTube videos. On my phone. Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. YouTube videos on a cracked phone screen. And you learned enough that the director himself came running when he heard you play. That's remarkable, David. Nobody had ever called anything he did remarkable before. I have an upright piano in my classroom, Mrs. Chen said casually, like she was commenting on the weather. It's old. Nothing fancy like that grand piano you were playing, but it works fine. I stay late most days, grading papers and planning lessons. The classroom's empty during lunch, too. David looked up at her, not quite understanding. I'm just saying, if someone wanted to practice during lunch period, or maybe after school before their father finished work, well, I'm usually there. And I'd hate to see that old piano go unused. She stood up, gathering her lunch tray. Room 204. Doors usually unlocked. She walked away before David could respond, leaving him sitting there with his mouth open and hope rising in his chest like a balloon. He didn't go that day. It felt like a trap or a test or maybe a dream he'd misunderstood. But the next day, during lunch, he found himself standing outside room 204. His hand shook as he knocked. Come in, Mrs. Chen's voice called. The classroom was small and cluttered with music stands and chairs stacked in the corner. The upright piano sat against the far wall, old and scratched, nothing like the beautiful grand piano upstairs at the center. But to David, it might as well have been made of gold. Well, don't just stand there, Mrs. Chen said from her desk. Play something. Let me hear what 3 months of YouTube videos taught you. David sat at the bench. His fingers found the keys and suddenly everything else faded away. He played the simple melody he'd been working on, the one he'd been playing when the director burst in. It wasn't perfect. He missed a few notes and his timing was off in places. But it was music. Real music. When he finished, Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. You have good instincts, she finally said, but you're teaching yourself bad habits. Your hand position is all wrong. You're not using your thumb properly. And you're not reading music, are you? You're playing by ear and memory. David shook his head, embarrassed. That's not a criticism. Playing by ear is a gift. But if you want to get better, really better, You need to learn to read music properly. You need to understand theory. You need someone to teach you the right way. I can't afford lessons, David said quietly. Did I say anything about money? Mrs. Chen stood up and walked over to the piano. She pulled a book from the shelf above it. Lunch is 35 minutes. If you come here every day, that's almost 3 hours a week. After school adds another hour or two. That's more than enough time for lessons. Why would you do that? Mrs. Chen smiled and her crooked glasses slipped down her nose. Because 30 years ago I was a girl who loved music but couldn't afford lessons. Someone helped me. Now I help you. That's how it works. So David's new routine began. Every lunch period he'd eat his sandwich as fast as possible and then run to room 204. Mrs. Chen would be there, red pen in hand, grading papers while he practiced. She taught him to sit properly, to curve his fingers, to use his whole arm and not just his hands. She taught him to read music like it was a new language, showing him how the notes on the page translated to keys on the piano. After school, he'd practice for an hour before meeting his father in the lobby. Mrs. Chen rarely sat with him during these sessions. She'd work at her desk or organize her classroom, but she was always there, always listening. When he made a mistake, she'd call out the correction without even looking up. When he got something right, she'd say better in a way that made him want to work even harder. The other kids at school still whispered about him. They still called him janitor boy when they thought he couldn't hear. But it bothered him less now. He had something they didn't understand, something they couldn't take away. He had the music. Weeks passed. His fingers got stronger. The calluses got thicker. The notes that once seemed impossible became easier. Mrs. Chen introduced him to composers he'd never heard of. She taught him pieces that made his hands ache and his brain hurt from concentration. "You're getting good," she said one afternoon in November. "Really good. Better than some kids who've been taking lessons for years." David ducked his head, uncomfortable with praise. "I'm serious. You have something special. Raw talent combined with dedication. That's rare." She paused, tapping her pen against her desk. "Have you heard about the winter showcase at the Riverside Center?" David's stomach clenched. "Yeah, the fancy concert where all the rich kids perform. It's not just for rich kids. It's for talented kids. Every year, the center invites students to perform for donors and representatives from music schools. It's a big deal. Scholarships get offered. Opportunities happen. I'm not a student there. No, but there's a wild card spot. Every year, the director chooses one performer based on teacher recommendations. Someone who isn't part of the regular program but shows exceptional promise." David's heart started beating faster. "You think I could?" "I think you should. The showcase is in 6 weeks. That gives us time to prepare a piece. Something that shows technical skill but also emotion. Something that tells a story." Mrs. Chen pulled out a sheet of music. "This one? It's challenging, but I think you can do it." David looked at the music. The notes seemed to swim on the page, so many of them, so complex. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You're not," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "Not yet. But you will be. We have 6 weeks. You're going to practice this every single day. You're going to practice until your fingers know it without thinking, and then you're going to perform it at that showcase. But Mr. Castellano hates me. He'd never pick me." Mrs. Chen smiled, and there was something mischievous in that smile. "Who said he needs to know it's you? The recommendations are submitted with student numbers, not names. The recording has no identification. He'll judge on talent alone. Is that allowed?" "It's not against the rules. A bit sneaky maybe, but sometimes you have to be sneaky to get a fair chance." She handed him the sheet music. "So what do you say? You ready to work harder than you've ever worked before?" David looked at the music, then at the piano, then at Mrs. Chen's encouraging face. He thought about the grand piano in room 307, about the music that still echoed in his dreams, about the feeling of creating something beautiful. "Yes," he said, "I'm ready." The piece Mrs. Chen chose was called Winter's Tale. David had never heard of it before, and when he first tried to play it, he understood why she'd warned him it would be challenging. His fingers stumbled over the keys. The timing was complicated, with rhythms that seemed to shift and change just when he thought he understood them. Some sections required his hands to stretch farther than they'd ever stretched before. Other parts moved so fast his fingers tangled together like knots. "Again," Mrs. Chen would say from her desk. Just that one word over and over. David would start from the beginning. Miss the same note, mess up the same transition. Again. His fingers ached. His back hurt from sitting so long. His eyes burned from staring at the sheet music until the notes blurred together. Again. But slowly, painfully, impossibly, it started to come together. The first page became familiar. Then the second. His fingers began to remember the patterns, the stretches, the quick movements that had seemed impossible just days before. 2 weeks in, Mrs. Chen made her move. She recorded him playing the piece. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was good enough to show promise. She submitted it to the Riverside Center with a student number she'd created. Nothing that could identify David. No name. No photo. Just the music. Now we wait, she told him. And while we wait, you keep practicing. The waiting was torture. Every day, David wondered if the director had listened to his recording yet. If he had, what did he think? Would he recognize the playing from that night in room 307? Could you identify someone just by how they played piano? At school, things got worse before they got better. Some kid named Tyler from the rich part of town had heard the story about David and the piano. Tyler's parents donated money to the Riverside Center every year. His older sister performed there all the time. "Hey, janitor boy," Tyler called out one day in the hallway. "I heard you think you're some kind of musician now." "That's funny. My family's been in music for generations." "You really think watching some videos makes you special?" David tried to walk past him, but Tyler stepped in his way. "You know what's sad? People like you thinking you can just skip all the years of real training and lessons and somehow be good enough. That's not how the world works. Leave him alone, Tyler." A girl named Rachel pushed past them both. She was in David's English class, quiet like him. "You're being a jerk." "I'm being honest," Tyler shot back. "Someone needs to tell him the truth. Poor kids don't become musicians. That's just reality." David felt his face burning, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. Because part of him wondered if Tyler was right. What was he doing? Who was he kidding, thinking he could perform at the showcase? These kids had been training their whole lives. They had private tutors and expensive instruments at home. They went to summer programs and music camps. He had YouTube videos and a cracked phone screen. That afternoon, his practice session was a disaster. His fingers wouldn't cooperate. Every note came out wrong. After 30 minutes of mistakes, he slammed his hands down on the keys in frustration. "Stop," Mrs. Chen said from her desk. David stood up, angry at himself, angry at Tyler, angry at everything. "Sit back down. I can't do this." "Tyler's right. I'm just the janitor's kid. What am I even thinking?" Mrs. Chen took off her crooked glasses and cleaned them with her shirt. "You know what I hear when you play?" David didn't answer. "I hear someone who loves music. Not someone who plays because their parents make them, or because they want to get into a good college, or because they think it'll look good on a resume. You play because you can't not play. That's the difference between a musician and someone who just plays an instrument. But I'm not trained. I don't have—" "Beethoven was deaf," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "Ray Charles was blind. Lots of famous musicians grew up poor or faced obstacles or had to teach themselves. You know what they all had in common?" David shook his head. They didn't give up when some kid in a hallway told them they weren't good enough. They didn't let other people's opinions become their reality. She put her glasses back on. "Now sit down and play it again. And this time, don't play it for Tyler or for the director or for anyone else. Play it for yourself." David sat back down. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and started again. This time he didn't think about the notes or the technique or whether he was good enough. He just played. He let the music flow through his fingers like water, like it had that first night in room 307. When he finished, Mrs. Chen was smiling. "That's it. That's what I wanted to hear." 3 weeks before the showcase, an envelope arrived at Mrs. Chen's classroom. The Riverside Center logo was printed in the corner. David's hand shook as she handed it to him. "Open it," she said. Inside was a formal letter on thick, expensive paper. David's eyes scanned the words, his heart hammering so hard he could barely read. "Dear Student 4847, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as this year's wildcard performer for the Winter Showcase." "I got in," David whispered. "I actually got in." Mrs. Chen clapped her hands together. "I knew you would. Your recording was excellent. But what happens when I show up? When the director sees it's me? We'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, you need to focus on being ready. This is your chance, David. Don't waste it worrying about things you can't control." The mandatory rehearsal was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks before the showcase. David's father had to work that day, so David took the bus alone. His stomach was in knots the entire ride. The letter said all performers had to attend the rehearsal. It was when they'd get their performance order and practice on the actual stage. Walking into the Riverside Center through the front entrance felt strange. David had only ever gone through the side door with his father, heading straight to the lobby or the maintenance closet. Now he walked in like a real student, his invitation letter clutched in his hand. The main theater was more beautiful than he'd imagined. Red velvet seats stretched back in rows. The stage was huge, with heavy curtains and lights that made everything look magical. A magnificent grand piano sat in the center of the stage, waiting. Other performers were already there with their parents. They all looked confident, comfortable. Their clothes were nice. Their instruments were in expensive cases. They belonged here. David definitely did not belong here. "Student IDs, please," a woman with a clipboard said at the door. David handed her his letter. "I'm the wildcard performer. Student 4847. She checked her list and smiled. "Ah, yes, welcome. You can take a seat in the front section with the other performers. Mr. Castellano will be out shortly to discuss the order and expectations." David found a seat at the end of the front row, trying to make himself invisible. The other kids chatted with each other, clearly friends from classes together. Nobody talked to him, but he was used to that. Then the side door opened and Mr. Castellano walked in. He looked exactly as David remembered. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of person who commanded attention just by entering a room. He walked onto the stage, his shoes clicking against the wood floor. "Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Winter Showcase rehearsal. This is one of the most important events of the year for our center. We have donors, representatives from prestigious music schools, and professional musicians attending. This is your opportunity to shine." His eyes scanned the audience, moving from face to face. "We have 12 performers this year, 11 of our regular students and 1 wildcard selection. This year's wildcard performer showed remarkable raw talent in their submission recording. Student 4847, would you please stand so we can welcome you properly?" David's legs felt like water, but he forced himself to stand. Slowly, he turned to face the stage. Mr. Castellano's face went from welcoming to confused to shocked to angry in about 3 seconds. The color drained from his cheeks, then rushed back twice as red. "You." The word came out like an accusation. Every eye in the theater turned to David. The whispers started immediately. "That's the janitor's kid. Isn't he banned from the building? How did he get chosen?" Mr. Castellano walked to the front of the stage. His jaw clenched so tight David could see the muscles working. "This is impossible. You're not even a registered student?" The letter said wildcard performers don't have to be registered, David managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just recommended by faculty." "Recommended by who?" "No one here would—" Mr. Castellano stopped himself, clearly trying to maintain composure in front of the other students and parents. "We need to discuss this. Everyone else, take a 10-minute break." He gestured sharply for David to follow him into the hallway. David's legs somehow carried him there, though he felt like he might throw up. "How did you do this?" Mr. Castellano demanded once they were alone. "How did you get someone to submit your recording?" "A teacher helped me. She said it wasn't against the rules." "Oh, so do you?" David thought about the past 4 months. The secret practices in room 307, the hours spent in Mrs. Chen's classroom, the calluses on his fingers. The way music made him feel like he mattered, like he was more than just invisible. "Yes," he said. "I do." "Then let's go make some magic." Inside, the theater was transformed. The lights were brighter, the stage looked bigger, and the seats were packed with people. David recognized some faces from around town. Local business owners, teachers from other schools, parents of the performing students. In the back row, he spotted his father, wearing his church shirt and looking uncomfortable but proud. The performers waited in a room backstage. Everyone had their own way of dealing with nerves. Some paced. Others ran through finger exercises. Tyler sat in the corner looking confident, his expensive suit perfectly pressed. "You're the last one to perform," a girl named Hannah said. She was nice, one of the few who'd actually talked to him during rehearsal. "That's either really good or really bad. Why?" "Good because you're what people remember most." Bad because you have to sit through everyone else while getting more and more nervous. She smiled. But you'll do great. I heard your rehearsal. You're really talented. Thanks, David managed to say. One by one, the performers were called to the stage. David could hear the muffled sounds of music through the thick backstage door. Piano, violin, cello, flute. Everyone was good. Really good. These weren't just kids who played instruments. These were serious musicians. Tyler went on 10th. David heard his piece through the door, a complicated classical work that Tyler executed perfectly. The applause was loud and long. When Tyler came back, he looked right at David and smirked. The 11th performer, Hannah, played a beautiful violin piece that made some people in the audience cry. When she came back, she was shaking but smiling. Then it was just David. The stage manager, a woman with a headset, gave him the signal. You're up. Good luck. David walked through the door and onto the stage. The lights hit him like a physical force, bright and hot. Beyond them, he could see the dark shapes of hundreds of people, all watching, all waiting. His heart hammered so hard he thought everyone could hear it. The piano waited in the center of the stage. Not the grand piano from room 307, but still beautiful, still perfect. David walked to it, his legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. He sat down on the bench, adjusted his position, placed his fingers on the keys, took a deep breath. In the audience, he found his father, then Mrs. Chen sitting a few rows back. They both nodded at him. The room fell completely silent. David closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought about that first day he'd touched the piano in room 307, the way the notes had rung out, clear and true. The way the music had made him feel less alone, less invisible, more real. He opened his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle, like snowflakes falling. His fingers moved across the keys with a confidence he didn't know he had. The piece built slowly, carefully, each section flowing into the next like a river. He forgot about the audience, forgot about Tyler's smirk and the director's anger and the whispers at school. He forgot about being the janitor's kid, about the cracked phone screen and the drawn paper keyboard. He forgot about everything except the music. His hands stretched and reached and danced across the keys. The soft sections whispered secrets. The loud sections demanded attention. The complicated middle part that had given him so much trouble flowed out perfectly, his fingers knowing exactly where to go. This was why he'd risked everything. This feeling right here, this moment of creating something beautiful, something that mattered, this was worth every hard practice, every whispered insult, every doubt and fear. The final notes came, soft and sweet, fading away like a dream. David held the last chord, letting it ring out into the silent theater, then released the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. Complete, total silence. Then the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then two, then suddenly everyone was on their feet. The sound was deafening. David sat frozen at the piano, unable to believe what was happening. People were standing up for him, the janitor's kid. He stood on shaking legs and took a small bow, just like Mrs. Chen had taught him. The applause continued. In the audience, his father was crying, not even trying to hide it. Mrs. Chen was clapping with her hands over her head, her crooked glasses sliding down her nose, the biggest smile David had ever seen on her face. As David walked off the stage, his legs still shaking, he passed Mr. Castellano standing in the wings. The director's face was impossible to read. Angry, impressed, confused? Maybe all three. But David didn't care anymore. He'd done it. He'd played his heart out in front of hundreds of people, and they'd actually listened. They'd actually heard him. For the first time in his life, David wasn't invisible. Backstage, David couldn't stop shaking. His hands trembled. His knees felt weak. The other performers stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to respect to something that might have been jealousy. Hannah hugged him. That was incredible. I've never heard anything like that. Even some of the other kids, the ones who'd ignored him during rehearsal, came over to congratulate him. Tyler stayed in his corner, arms crossed, silent. The stage manager poked her head in. All performers back on stage for the closing remarks. Line up in performance order. David followed the others back out. The lights were still bright, the audience still there. They lined up across the stage while Mr. Castellano walked to the microphone. His face was composed now, professional, but David couldn't read what he was thinking. Thank you all for attending tonight's winter showcase, Mr. Castellano began. We've witnessed some exceptional talent this evening. Our students have worked incredibly hard, and their dedication shows. He talked about the center's mission, thanked the donors, mentioned the upcoming spring season. David barely heard any of it. His mind was still replaying those moments at the piano, still feeling the music flowing through his fingers. Before we conclude, Mr. Castellano continued, I'd like to acknowledge something unusual happened tonight. Our final performer, our wildcard selection, reminded me of something I'd forgotten. David's heart started pounding again. Music doesn't care about your background. It doesn't care about your bank account or your last name or how many years of private lessons you've had. Music only cares about one thing, whether you have something to say. He paused and for the first time all evening looked directly at David. Tonight we heard someone with something to say. Something real, something honest. And that's what music is supposed to be. The audience applauded again. David felt his face burning. Thank you all again. Refreshments are being served in the lobby. Feel free to speak with our performers and faculty. As they filed off stage, Mr. Castellano caught David's arm. Wait, I need to speak with you. David's stomach dropped. Here it came. The anger, the punishment, the consequences he'd been promised. But Mr. Castellano didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired, maybe even a little sad. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. When I found you in room 307, I was furious. That piano, it was special to me. A gift from a mentor who believed in me when no one else did. I was protecting it, or so I thought. But really, I was being selfish. David didn't know what to say. You played tonight the way music is meant to be played. With passion. With heart. I haven't heard someone play like that in years. Most of our students, they're technically perfect. They hit every note, follow every rule. But you made people feel something. That's the difference between a good musician and a great one. Thank you, sir. Mr. Castellano smiled, a real smile this time. Next week, Tuesday evening, come to room 307, 6 o'clock. We'll talk about your future. I think it's time that piano got played properly again. Before David could respond, someone else approached them. It was Mr. Harrison, the board chairman, and with him was a woman David didn't recognize. She was younger than his teachers, dressed in professional clothes, carrying a leather folder. Mr. Castellano, may I? Mr. Harrison said. Of course, the woman extended her hand to David. Hello, I'm Jennifer Walsh. I'm a recruitment coordinator for the Eastwood Academy of Music. David shook her hand, confused. Eastwood Academy is one of the premier music schools in the region, she explained. We provide intensive training for gifted young musicians. I was here tonight scouting for potential students for our summer intensive program and our scholarship program. David's mouth went dry. Your performance tonight was extraordinary. Not just technically proficient, which it was, but emotionally mature. You told a story with that piece. You made every person in that audience feel something. She opened her folder. I'd like to talk to you and your parents about a full scholarship to Eastwood Academy. Room, board, instruction, everything covered. We rarely offer full scholarships to students your age, but I think you're exactly the kind of talent we're looking for. The world seemed to tilt sideways. David heard the words, understood them individually, but together they didn't make sense. A scholarship? To a real music school? I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Jennifer said kindly. Here's my card. Have your parents call me next week? We'll set up a meeting, show you the campus, introduce you to our faculty. No pressure. Just an opportunity. She handed him a business card. It was heavy, expensive paper. Real. This was actually happening. Your father is here, right? Mr. Harrison asked. We should probably find him and explain all this. They found David's father in the lobby, standing awkwardly near the refreshment table with a cup of punch he hadn't touched. When he saw David approaching with all these important-looking people, his eyes went wide. Dad, this is Jennifer Walsh from Eastwood Academy, and this is Mr. Harrison, the board chairman. Sir, your son is remarkably talented, Jennifer said, shaking his father's hand. I'd like to discuss a scholarship opportunity with you. David's father looked at David, then at Jennifer, then back at David. A scholarship? For David? A full scholarship to one of the best music schools in the state, Mr. Harrison added. Your son did something very special tonight. David watched his father's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, disbelief, and then finally overwhelming pride. His eyes filled with tears for the second time that night. He practiced so hard, his father said, his voice thick. Every day. I knew he loved it, but I didn't know. I didn't understand how good he was. He's very good, Jennifer said, and with proper training he could be exceptional. Mrs. Chen appeared then, weaving through the crowd. When she saw everyone gathered around David, she stopped and smiled that knowing smile of hers. Mrs. Chen, David called out. Come here, please. She walked over, adjusting her crooked glasses. This is my teacher, David said to Jennifer and Mr. Harrison. She's the one who helped me, who taught me, who believed in me when no one else did. Then we owe you a debt of gratitude, Jennifer said, shaking Mrs. Chen's hand. Good teachers are the foundation of great musicians. I just showed him the path, Mrs. Chen said, looking at David with pride. He's the one who walked it. The next hour was a blur of conversations and congratulations. Other parents came up to compliment David's performance. Some of the other student performers asked him questions about his training. Even a few of the donors wanted to shake his hand. Tyler walked past once, his parents on either side of him. He didn't say anything, but David caught his eye. There was no smirk this time, just a nod, maybe even a hint of respect. Rachel found him near the end of the evening. I told you, she said, grinning. I told you that you'd be amazing. You were right. I'm always right. You should remember that, she laughed. So what happens now? Are you going to that fancy music school? I don't know yet. We have to talk about it. My dad and I. David looked around the lobby, at all these people who hours ago didn't know he existed. But yeah, I think I am. I think I really am. When the crowd finally thinned out, David and his father walked to the car together. The night was cold, stars visible in the clear sky. They didn't talk for a while, both of them processing everything that had happened. Finally, his father said, You know I can't help you with this music stuff. I don't understand it like your teacher does. I don't know anything about schools or scholarships or any of that. I know, Dad. But I'm proud of you, so proud I could burst. You took something you loved and you fought for it. You didn't let anyone tell you it wasn't for you. That takes courage. He put his hand on David's shoulder. Your mother would have been proud too. She always said you were special. I didn't always see it, but she did. And tonight everyone saw it. David's mother had died when he was 6. She was mentioned rarely. The loss still too painful even after 8 years. Hearing his father bring her up now, tonight of all nights, made David's throat tight. I wish she could have been there. I think she was, his father said softly. I think she heard every note. They drove home in comfortable silence, the city lights passing by outside the window. David's phone buzzed multiple times with messages. Rachel congratulating him again. Hannah asking if he wanted to hang out sometime. Even a few people from school who'd never talked to him before suddenly wanted to be friends. But David was thinking about Tuesday, about going back to room 307, about sitting at that beautiful grand piano again, the one that had started all of this, about learning from Mr. Castellano, about preparing for Eastwood Academy, about a future he'd never dared to imagine. He thought about that first day, sneaking into the abandoned wing, pressing that first key, hearing that first note ring out. He'd been so scared, so alone. Just the invisible janitor's kid who nobody noticed, but music had seen him. Music had known he was there, and now everyone else knew it too. The next morning, David woke up and the first thing he did was look at Jennifer Walsh's business card on his nightstand. It was still there. Last night had really happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Proud of you. Tuesday after school, we start preparing you for Eastwood. Lots of work ahead. Rest up, David smiled. Of course there was more work ahead. There would always be more work. More pieces to learn, more techniques to master, more challenges to overcome. But that didn't scare him anymore. He got out of bed and walked to his desk. The paper keyboard he'd drawn months ago was still there, worn and smudged from countless practice sessions. He didn't need it anymore. Soon he'd have access to real pianos, real teachers, real opportunities. But he folded it carefully and put it in his drawer anyway, a reminder of where he'd started. A reminder that sometimes the biggest dreams begin with the smallest actions. A reminder that being invisible doesn't mean you don't matter. It just means nobody's looked closely enough yet. On Tuesday evening, David climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor of the Riverside Center for the first time since that night he'd been caught. His father walked with him, both of them quiet as they approached room 307. Mr. Castellano was already there, sitting at the grand piano, playing something soft and beautiful. When he saw them, he stopped. "Come in," he said. "Both of you." David and his father entered the room. It looked different now. The curtains had been opened, letting in the evening light. The dust had been cleaned away. The piano gleamed. "This piano was given to me by a man named Jonathan Wright," Mr. Castellano said. "He was my teacher, my mentor, my friend. He believed in me when I was just a poor kid who loved music but had no money for lessons. He taught me for free, gave me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. When he died, he left me this piano with one instruction. Use it to help someone else the way I helped you." He stood up from the bench and gestured for David to sit. "I forgot that instruction. I got protective, possessive. I let this beautiful instrument sit unused because I was afraid someone might damage it. But instruments aren't meant to sit silent. They're meant to make music," he smiled. "So here's what's going to happen. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening you come here. We work on your technique, your repertoire, your understanding of theory. We prepare you properly for Eastwood Academy. And you play this piano the way it deserves to be played." David sat at the bench, his hands hovering over the keys he'd missed so much. "Go ahead," Mr. Castellano said. "Play something." David took a breath and began to play. The same piece from the showcase, but this time it felt different. More confident, more real. Because this time he wasn't playing in secret. He wasn't invisible. He was exactly where he belonged. And when the final note faded away, Mr. Castellano was smiling. David's father was crying again. And David finally understood what his mother had known all along. He was special. He always had been. He just needed the chance to prove it.